And we're going to transition over to Karli, who has done some work with people in Nundalton, and she'll also share her presentation on two-eyed seeing salmon science. So if anybody can see a theme this morning, it's about how near and dear are salmon to us.
All right, bonjour, Ani. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon if you're in the lower 48 tuning in. Bonjour, Indigenous, Karli, Tyance, Hassell, Anishinabe, Yashsiking, Anishinaabe. My people are not from Alaska. I'm Anishinaabe from Gull Bay First Nation, which is in Canada, but I moved to Alaska almost 4 years ago now to do my master's, and this work is speaking about my master's thesis and the beautiful community of Nanwallic. But I just want to say welcome and good morning, and thank you to Bjorn and Ozzy for the beautiful words and message of our salmon relations. So I'm actually a community researcher at the Fisheries Aquatic Science and Technology Lab at Alaska Pacific University. And so I was a student there, a master's student. I graduated in December, and now I'm working there and continuing my thesis work and some other work with other communities in fisheries. And so before I begin, I just wanted to acknowledge the Denina people. I'm not Indigenous to this place, but I just, there's such beautiful culture, beautiful land, and I'm very thankful to be living in Anchorage and working with communities up here. Although we're different, we're very much the same in different ways too. So I just want to say miigwech, thank you for allowing me to be here. And so before I begin, I just wanted to bring up this image here. And, there's this shifting change and need to conduct Indigenous-led research that is grounded in Indigenous ways of knowing. And as Anishinaabe Kwe or Anishinaabe woman in academia in a Western university setting, I really aim to serve Indigenous communities. That's my passion. That's my heart. That's where I start my research. And, I kind of aim to be this conduit between two different ways of knowing. And my traditional teachings, such as Minobamadzawin, or Living the Good Life, the Seven Grandfather teachings, the principle of all my relations, these really influenced my research and my current practice as I work with communities. And, rather than approaching this project or this research project in a traditional sense, where you remove personal biases and you remove emotion and follow the scientific method, I argue that the strength of, who you are as an Indigenous person, like Ozzy had said, it keeps you grounded. And I think that this approach really was successful in having, this research project come to fruition. And so kind of zooming out from that, you see this Spiderweb model. And this framework was actually adapted by Dr. Lori Lambert of the American Indian Research Association. And you can see, this really depicts the winding path of research. It's nonlinear, and it shows how everything's really connected. And so kind of at the nodes of the spider web, you see different components that ground research. And this is, really an Indigenous research paradigm. And, at the center there, you see the heart of, who you are as a researcher or as an Indigenous person who is in research. And kind of building off of that, I present the two-eyed seeing framework. And this was actually championed by Mi'kmaq elder Albert Marshall. And he says, the quote there at the bottom, it says, to see from one eye what the strengths of Indigenous ways of knowing, and to see from the other eye what the strengths of Western ways of knowing, and to use both eyes to see together. And so, this pluralistic or multidisciplinary approach, it really guided our fishery project. And it was, the hope to bring community-driven concerns really at the forefront, asking these questions that the communities have and trying to address them in a respectful manner. And, this framework doesn't really aim to assimilate, either side. It doesn't, try to other the other knowledge system. And, it's really a convergent approach that we used. And, together we can really work across different disciplines in a respectful and reciprocal way, and form, these research strategies together. So keeping in mind the two-eyed seeing framework as I kind of go through this presentation, it was really the work of a lot of different people from various entities. And it's just one way or one approach, our approach that we used to approach fisheries management and fisheries questions that the community had. So let's take a trip to Nanwallic. Nanwallic is actually off the road system. They're just located south of Homer. They're on the very tip of the Kenai Peninsula. And it was actually one of the first sites of a Russian trading post. It was formerly called Alexandrovsky, and then it was later reclaimed or renamed to its traditional name, Nanwallic. Before that, it was English Bay. But Nanwallic, in the Suxton language, it means place by the lagoon. And it's a beautiful place, beautiful people, and I'm just really lucky to continue to work with them. So how did we really begin working together? This framework I present here, it's actually, was made in retrospect as I kind of thought about my research, my thesis project. And this kind of just depicts the natural process of how this framework or relationship with salmon kind of developed. And at the center there, you see the two-eyed seeing, or the Indigenous research paradigm with the researcher at the center. But essentially, I just wanted to pull this up and show you, it's not really a generalizable approach to research, but rather our approach to the project, and serious work, dedication, and time commitment is required to form these respectful, relevant research relationships. And so, almost 3 years ago, the FAST lab, the fisheries lab that I'm a part of, was invited to speak to Nanwallic, or with Nanwallic, about their fishery. They approached us with concerns about the decline of their sockeye salmon. And so a step one in the process was to, establish a working relationship with them and kind of initiate or identify ways we could collaborate. And this meant getting to know them, the system, the fishery, the history of the fishery, which has some political components to it as well. And, we also tried to figure out where our place is as a research lab, and how we could potentially offer our technical advice or expertise in answering some of these community-related questions or concerns. And so these first initial meetings allowed us to develop these relationships, develop a rapport, make connections, and really identify clear reasons to collaborate, and have a project governance structure. So it was really a joint effort. And so what we heard from those meetings, those few first meetings and dinners and coffee together, there was a lot of history. The fishery, it's really important to the community for cultural identity, for food security, economic opportunities, and sustainability. And we listened a little bit more, and we heard and made notes about the ecosystem itself, but also the human dimensions and the community process of communicating through both a traditional, Indigenous lens, but also a Western lens, because we are working with the university, and it's there's researchers involved who have a lot of expertise or specialization in salmon and salmon habitat. And so those are just a couple of beautiful photos and just a panoramic of the English Bay Lake system. And so through those meetings, this is what we heard. The actual system is comprised of 5 lakes. They're all connected and they're named First Lake, Second Lake, Third Lake, Fourth Lake, and Fifth Lake. And in the 1980s, they started to notice this decline in escapement, and the elders were saying that they used to see over 40,000 fish coming back every year. And this system actually only really contains the only wild stock of sockeye that's native to the southern kind of district of the Lower Cook Inlet Management Area. And yeah, so they started to notice the decline in escapement, and the community actually, they run their own weir. They have their own weir technicians, and they report the numbers back to Fish and Game. And there've been a lot of, historical relationship strains, with the community and between Fish and Game. It was very political, and there's been a lot of outside entities try to come in and stock the lakes. This hasn't been successful, and the relationships that they've had in the past with outside researchers, it wasn't very meaningful. So essentially, the community wanted to. They really expressed the need for community-based monitoring, for more answers and assistance to answer these questions they had about their fishery and what could be affecting the salmon. And so this is what we heard. It took almost a whole year to make these connections and these understand these processes. I know this text is very small and you can't really see it, but in purple we have human dimensions and the different people who have been involved in the fishery over the years. In orange you have traditional ecological knowledge. They've been stewards of this area for a very long time, and they know so much beautiful history of the fish relations. And then you have the biophysical variables that could be impacting salmon. Essentially, as a master's student, I had to focus on a few areas of specific objectives. But the major question that the community had was, how can we improve this fishery for years to come? And the community wanted to have more self-determination, more autonomy, and make more informed management decisions. And essentially the lab, the fisheries lab that I'm a part of, was able to provide a few suggestions of how we can utilize different tools to answer these community-driven questions or concerns about the fishery and potentially provide some insight. And again, using this framework of traditional knowledge and science to provide us with a more expert system and a better understanding of the fishery. And so how did we decide to tackle some of these questions or concerns? Essentially we want local research interests to establish and inform these data collection priorities. And so we want to do that, but also simultaneously build capacity and technical knowledge. And so one of the tools we used was drones or small unmanned aerial systems, and we used it to map the system aerially. We made an orthomosaic on the right-hand side. You could see some of the different data products. And so we have amazing data products now and beautiful videos you can see of the actual system, very high quality photo, and you can create different models, digital elevation models, and track how things change over time. And what we ended up doing is we printed off a very large high resolution map of the orthomosaic map, the little image you see at the bottom right there. And we had these maps on tables, and we talked to youth, and they were circling areas of concern. And, it was almost like an informal exercise of participatory mapping and, mapping these fisheries concerns. And so essentially, you'll have this data over the years, some spatial temporal data, information that can be used, perhaps monitoring erosion, monitoring fish passage, things like that. And, the next stages is, some youth really want to actually get trained in becoming a drone pilot. And so, all of this data will be very useful in helping the community make more informed decisions regarding the fishery. Another concern that the community had was invasive species like pike or elodia coming into the system. So we tried to develop and test a new method for detecting using environmental DNA. And so this is a relatively new technology, but sampling in and of itself is very easy. We made like a homemade filtering system to filter the water made out of a Nalgene bottle. And this can be, really easily incorporated into a community-based monitoring program. And we even had some youth do some of the data collection. And, it's just another accessible tool that can provide baseline data, and we can monitor changes, biologically significant changes or events over the years. Another really interesting thing that came up in these conversations, these community meetings, was, we talked with elders and they said that we have like kind of two different runs, like the timing of the runs are different. So, some come in late July, others come a little bit later, and they called them bluebacks and the others were greenbacks. And so there's like a visual difference. Perhaps these are different ecotypes, and perhaps there are genetic differences. So we ended up taking axillary process of several fish at the weir site and throughout the system to try to see if there's different differences between these bluebacks or greenbacks, as the elders called them. So again, just different tools we've decided to use to try to address some of community concerns. And as climate change, starts to impact Alaska, or has been impacting Alaska, water temperature and quality has been a really big concern. So we installed water temperature sensors, and these were installed at different sites across the system. And the water quality sampling will also provide information on potential contaminants or trace metals, pH, nitrate levels, things that could be impacting salmon health or aquatic systems. And, one barrier is always, how do you share these results with the community in a way that's culturally responsive? And maybe there's a specialist who can bring, information to the community who might be better at disseminating results than I could be. And maybe there are different methods of science communication. Storytelling, that's a very oral tradition that we're used to. But is there training that we could do as scientists to enable us to be better science communicators? These are all just things that, I try to be aware of as I conduct work with communities. And one of my big passions is working with youth. And so every time we do a trip to Nanwallic, we try to work with the school. These are just a couple of different activity stations that we did with the kids. They got to fly the drone. They got to, do the water filtration and really, inspire youth to become involved in fishery science, to be curious, to get them curious about post-secondary education. And, maybe in the future they will become fishery biologists and, return to the community and work and, do the data collection or data analysis. So always great working with youth, very special. And so just kind of revisiting this, as a master's student, my time is really 2 or 3 years to try to complete a degree, but thinking about the sustainability of this project, and it was, really important to me to try to think of ways to be sustainable because, you have a history of people coming in doing helicopter data collection, essentially coming in, taking the data, and then leaving, and you're never heard of again. So kind of, removing yourself from that and, dealing with flexibility and innovation and change to try to be more sustainable. One approach that we decided was to form a fishery working group. And, this group is really designed to bring together individuals with relevant knowledge and skills who can either act individually or collectively to undertake different objectives or assign tasks and activities to try to improve the fishery for future generations. And so, at the heart of this fishery working group, we have elders, youth, community members, teachers, and they're the ones who are really driving the research. And we have other outside entities, such as the Chugach Regional Resources Commission, the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, and then the FAST Lab, the Fisheries Lab, trying to assist in accomplishing these missions and these visions and the goals that we have together. This really speaks to the longevity of the partnership. And this could really inform fishery management. It could inform policymakers because working together collectively, our voice is stronger together. We could really impact regulations both internally, externally, and really address challenges and barriers to effective engagement and management within fisheries. And thinking about this too, I really think that a foundational component to Indigenous ways of knowing an identity is to have people use storytelling or oration. We've used this since time immemorial, so I really wanted to incorporate partnership feedback into this process, this research process. So, I wanted to allow a means of partners to speak for themselves. So what I did was I went back and I interviewed people. I interviewed Nanwallic community members. I interviewed people from the fishery working group to reflect on the progression or the impacts that this, process has had on them individually, but also collectively. And so I compiled a lot of really great clips, and just for the sake of time, I can't show all of them, but I just wanted to share a brief clip that the teacher, Penny Bearden, who is a teacher at Nanwallic, I just wanted to share part of her interview to show the impact that it's had on everyone, from the youth to the researchers to the fisheries class, from APU coming and visiting the community. So I just wanted to share that with you guys really quickly.
I remember the first time that APU came to the campus and Karli took her drone out. And I had one student in particular that I really was having a hard time connecting with. He just seemed really unhappy and unengaged. And the drones really caught his attention. And not only that they caught his attention, but after they were gone or when we were done with it and I was getting feedback from students, he said, I want to learn how to fly a drone. I want to get licensed in flying drones. I want to make this impact. And that was the first time that I had seen him take an interest in anything. So that was just amazing.
Just really impactful statements by project partners. This fishery working group is going to really continue project momentum. And our next plan is to develop a strategic plan or like a guiding document, and this will enable us to, address more questions, more concerns, and conduct more research and improve fishery management decisions in the future. It's hard to summarize work within, the time frame, but I really wanted to say miigwech, Guyana, thank you to everyone who's been involved in this project. I'm really excited to see what the future holds. So miigwech, and thank you.
Ganesh Karli. I appreciate your work and that you came and shared it with us today.